Good evening, and welcome to the 18th ordinary meeting of the Literary Scientific Society. I apologise very graciously to the House for being absent last week, but my planet needed me. I kind of had like emergency dental surgery, so I would have chaired, but you would have had the grace of being chaired by Rocky Balboa. Announcements. The one announcement we have this week, we have literally one announcement this week, and it's the biggest announcement of the semester. So, 3rd of April, Monday the 3rd of April, we'll be having our annual general meeting. That gives you the opportunity to run for council if you want. You can do my job. You won't do it as well as I do. So we have so many positions on the council this year. We have 2 new positions. So we have president, external convener, internal convener, outreach officer. We no longer have our representative positions. They're being replaced by training officer and social officer. So if you've enjoyed the society this year and you want to contribute to it, maybe you think you want to run for social officer and throw a really good sesh. I don't know what your fancies are. No, this isn't the time where you ask questions. Give me a minute. Once I get out of the way, you ask. So that will be on Monday the 3rd of April. Any candidates who want to run for positions for that may submit a manifesto no more than 200 words and a nice photo of yourself by no later than next Sunday, which is, I believe, Sunday the 19th. So we'll be posting out on the Literary Forum so people get an idea of what you're running for, what you'd like to do for the society, stuff like that. The only other thing, actually, I just realised we have an older member here. We give out at the end of every year honorary life membership cards to people who've shown extraordinary dedication to the society and have gone above and beyond the call of duty to help out and just do whatever they can for the society. And I'm very pleased to announce that one of our old members, Mr. Kieran Gallagher, you might know him as the Pirate, for the Student Union presidency a few years ago. So it is my pleasure to award an honorary life membership card to Mr. Kieran Gallagher. That we move on to the minutes and then private membership business. So I welcome our secretary to read the minutes for the week.
Good evening, one all. The 17th ordinary meeting of the Literary and Scientific Society at Queen's University, Belfast took place on the 2nd of March and was attended by 27 members. Private members' business was heard from Mr. Hugh Dolan and Rachel Ireland, who briefly raised the red-hot issue of student union politics, before Ciara Campbell asked the House if the new party makeup of Stormont would bring about any significant change. Mr. Calvin Black was to define just what significant meant. Meanwhile, Mr. Craig Miller celebrated the DUP falling below that magic number of 30 seats, while Mr. Harry Adair whipped out his Walkman and belted out Rule Britannia on repeat. Mr. John McLean then inevitably turned to the rise of the far right in Europe, asking the House to ponder whether Marie Le Pen should be in prison. Mr. Craig Miller said this showed just how disgusting the EU was, because of course he did. Meanwhile, Mr. Harry Adair said that there was a danger of MLP being seen as a Joan of Arc character, sacrificing herself in order to preach the truth. Chairwoman for the evening, Ms. Lily Vetter, then moved on to President's questions, where Ciara Campbell asked where the presidential gown was. Ms. Vetter replied that the gown was safe in Ben Murphy's house in Bangor, stuck between his aga and his designer tea cozy. Mr. Matthew Sullivan then asked Ms. Vetter what she had for breakfast. Unlike Ben Murphy, Ms. Vetter was deliberately nondescript so as not to reveal the embarrassing contents of her truly forgettable luncheon. Ms. Vetter then asked the motion for the evening, this House believes animals are not a commodity. Opening for the proposition was Mr. Matthew Sullivan. He claimed that we as a species formerly had the inherent ability to delude ourselves into thinking that the person opposite us possesses a quality which makes them fundamentally different to ourselves, leading us to disregard their right to life in exchange for our own needs. He claimed that as time went on, we evolved to think beyond this with regard to other humans. However, we still turned a blind eye to the greatest atrocity, the killing of animals. He asserted that an intelligent dog is more intelligent than a 2-year-old human, deriding the argument that we as humans should massacre animals simply because we are perceived as being smarter than them. He concluded by asking the House to look beyond their emotional biases and realise that enslaving animals is no better than enslaving humans. Opening the opposition was Mr. Matthew Browder. I was not in attendance last week, so I took the minutes via an audio recording. As a result, Mr. Bradley's opening was both strange and unknown to me. As the honourable member was heard to produce something from his bag and eat it amidst a cascade of applause and boos. I assume it was a custard cream. Mr. Bradley rebutted the proposition by saying that a 2-year-old human has the potential to be significantly more intelligent than an animal, and the two can't possibly be compared. He concluded by saying that we kill animals out of necessity rather than malice, and asked the House to consider the last time a group of cows awarded another cow award for being outstanding in his field. Let that one stew for a moment. Concluding for the proposition. Okay. Concluding for the proposition was Mr. Jamie Cargill. Mr. Cargill opened with a quote from his spirit animal, Baroness Margaret Thatcher. Through the medium of Mr. Cargill, Lady Thatcher stated that we now have a duty to ensure the future generations do not face a crisis with regard to the environment, energy, or animals. He claimed that we in the Western world eat far more than any other area of the planet by a long stretch, and that 82% of starving children live in countries which export food to Western countries so that our animals can eat accessibly before we kill them. He concluded by saying that commodification of animals results in the death of 60 billion land animals and a further 90 billion sea animals and must be stopped for the sake of the environment as a whole. Concluding the opposition to the debate was Dr. Craig Miller. He asked the House to consider the medical implications of the decommodification of animals, giving the example of trainee medics performing mock operations on animals such as pigs. If this option weren't available, doctors would either be forced to practice on humans or risk not being adequately trained. He accused the proposition of spreading fake news and that a diet completely devoid of meat would also be devoid of vitamin B12, a lack of which would lead to severe health problems down the line. He gave the examples of Zimbabwe and Kenya as to how commodification has actually helped endangered species, and concluded by saying that it wasn't our intelligence which separated us from the animals, but our ability to self-reflect and our moral compass. Questions were heard from Ciara Campbell, Hugh Dobbin, Rachel Allen, Conor Arnold, Henry Adair, Anastasia, and Ciara Campbell. A vote based on House opinion was taken prior to the debate, which read 3 ayes, 15 nays, and 6 abstentions. Meanwhile, a casting vote was taken, which read 4 ayes, 12 nays, and 6 abstentions. May I take the minutes as read? Aye.
Right, we move on to private members' business, and I should preface that by saying that because the speakers are not up for the bant, we have 2 glasses of wine that are not being used, so I've given Rob the pleasurable task of awarding the 2 glasses of wine to the private member's business that he thinks is most interesting, or the most interesting pointer, some other completely arbitrary criteria. So, does anyone have any private members' business they'd like to raise, any sort of issues they'd like to raise and start a mini debate? We'll only do this for about 10 minutes, I'd say, because we do have quite a long debate in front of us. So, anyone at all? Yes, Mr. Black.
Mr. President, as you and I both know, this House has a long and noble tradition of not really commenting on the affairs of our student union, and an even longer tradition of treating them with a bit of disdain as they treat us with ambivalence in return. But if I may break with tradition for just a moment to reflect on the efforts of some of our members. Yesterday was the union elections, as some of you may know, and 2 among our number ran. The internal convener, Miss Lily Vetter, and our honourable member, Miss Rachel Ireland. Alas, both were unsuccessful in their campaigns. The forces of evil have triumphed once again. When shall we prevail, I do not know. But I think for the services that they have done in representing the desires of the society, shall I say, I think we should respond in kind with a rousing chorus of "For she's a jolly good fellow." So, to those of you who have prepared to sing with me, don't let me down now. And I do hope that everyone else will join in. So, what?
Of what duration? Like, are we going to...
Oh, no, like 10 seconds, 15, don't worry. They don't deserve that much respect. Okay, come on, Ben, come on. So, I want to. For she's a jolly good fellow, for she's a jolly good fellow, for she's a jolly good fellow. And so say all of us, and so say all of us, and so say all of us. Hey!
I don't normally say.
Don't give him a glass of wine because that's that's political polemic and that's
Well, I was going to say in Lambda, I don't think anyone would call me in remiss to hand Rachel Adams herself a cheeky little glass of wine.
I should probably just add that having been involved in said campaigns in a strictly non-literate capacity, I would just like to say that both campaigns are a testament to the character of both Lily and Rachel. I can't think of too many people who could have run for the actual election. It commiserates us sort of for not getting elected, so we can now all go back to our mutual disdain for the SU. And with that, I welcome any other private members' business from the floor. You're not a talkative bunch this evening. Mr. McAleenan.
If no one's got anything else, I'd like to just bring something to the House. Donald Trump has just named his new healthcare bill. Does anybody know what it's called?
Oh yes, it's my favourite name for a healthcare bill.
It's called the Greatest Healthcare Plan of 2017.
On that point, Mr. President.
Just briefly succeeded by the even greater healthcare plan. I'm the greatest yet.
Yourself there, Mr. Block.
Is that true, Mr. McAleenan? Really?
I've got an entire document here. We just want to read it.
Dear.
I expected nothing less from you.
Unbelievable.
I think that sort of demands a sort of American. Any other private members' business before we move on to President's questions? Yes, Mr. Milton.
Does this House approve of Sean Spicer's method of assessing the
No.
merits of the healthcare plan based on its in the example where he literally printed out the previous healthcare plan and his and compared the kinds of things?
Surely there is someone who will lead to this. Oh, Mr. Spicer. I noticed you don't put your hand down.
No.
Right, would you like to add anything constructive to that? It's like Sophie's choice here again. Yeah, Ms. Campbell.
I'll stand up, but I would just like to note that comparing how many pages each bill has shows a dangerous anti-intellectual trend within the Trump administration, which has been the precedent since the beginning of the Trump campaign, and I fear for democracy if we don't listen to the experts.
We've had enough of experts. Yes, Mr. Lee.
I think what we've actually seen through EU legislation is that it's actually even more secretive to pass through legislation that has thousands of pages because they know that it's too hard for the public to view, whereas whenever it's in the public eye and it's short, it's actually more transparent than the other.
Any remainers want to link to the defense of that? No, the wall? No. Yourself?
I say that by simplifying the law, they're costing jobs in the law industry.
On that point? You would be a lawyer, but he's like, no, totally unbiased in your head. Mr.
Whether we're going to be shortening the law, lengthening the law, there's always going to be fluctuation of jobs in any industry, be it healthcare, be it law. I don't think we need to count pages to tell everyone that.
Anyone else like to respond to that before we move on to the project? No, I've already done private members. Yourself?
I'm a law student, rather than costing us jobs in the industry, I think it's really important that it's accessible to like lay people and citizens who didn't have the law education, because a lot of them can't afford legal services. So I'm all for simplifying the law for people. That's all.
I think that's a very nice, concise point to end private members' business on. We'll move swiftly onward. So if anyone has any President's questions for me,
Well, who gets the wine?
it's arbitrary.
I like your point, but it kind of promotes Trump, so I'm not going to do that. Jeremy, I like you, so you can have the wine.
Right, and there was two questions here. Mr. Sullivan.
Tradition is one of the most important cornerstones of our society. Tradition is what ties us here to the past and all of the beliefs and values of our forefathers. However, this society has committed a grievous offence against the ideals of tradition. Mr. President, you must rectify this. We require a log of your previous 4 breakfasts.
I've not missed 4, thank you, Mr. Edmund Burke, for the... I don't think I've missed 4 breakfasts. I'd be very hungry if I had. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, never mind the last previous 4 breakfasts. I keep striving to have nicer breakfasts on Thursdays, but it never seems to make the effort, so I had a pot nibble for breakfast. I should set a very nice pot nibble. Moving swiftly onwards, anyone else have any more questions for me that aren't keys? Anyone else? Miss Arnold.
Where did the president get his tie?
Not telling you all, because Daniel will be on the hype train as well. Only I'm allowed to wear ties this next. It's basically constitutional at this point. So, yeah. Moving. No. Fine. Yeah.
Okay. It's actually relevant to Rich's last point. There are 3 speakers at the table wearing ties. So can the president please tell us, how do you wear a tie?
You have to do, well, you can have either a half Windsor knot or a full Windsor knot. Always go for a full Windsor. Always go for a Windsor. I feel it's just more respectable. Don't ask me to show you the difference between the 2, because to be honest, I just sort of wing it when I look at the mirror and see where it goes. So yeah,
Windsors have more influence in this country, I think.
Yeah. What you mean, the Saxe-Coburg Gauntlet? That's a nice tie scenario. The Saxe-Coburg Gauntlet tie. Nothing.
Put that off.
Pardon? Yeah, I mean, I said 10 minutes, and it's been around about 10 minutes. Introducing the debate this evening, this House would abolish safe spaces. I welcome to the floor the first speaker for the proposition, Mr. Connery.
Mr. Speaker, comrades of the House, last night I had the pleasure of turning the final page on a titan of philosophical thinking. Strikingly far-sighted at times and unbelievably wordy at others, I did take one key point from the essay, which is, if all mankind minus one were of the opinion and only one person was of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. The author was John Stuart Mill, the piece of writing on liberty, more than 150 years ago. Before I give way to my esteemed and capable compatriots, I'd like the chance to frame and give this position some context. It is this side of the House belief that every time you silence someone, you make yourself a prisoner to your own action, as you deny yourself the chance to hear something new. An intellectual crime against yourself for which only you suffer the consequences. There is 2 competing arguments here tonight. On this side of the House, that we should, under moral compulsion, suspend the laws of free speech to keep vulnerable individuals safe. On this side, that by doing so, we endanger our society as a whole and the safety of it. Safe spaces were hewn from the moral guilt that we Homo sapiens feel when we see someone in distress and wish to help them. An innate biological reaction that we all feel compelled to respond to. However, to frame the dialogue like this infers that the people on this side of the House lack compassion or compulsion to help. The very framing of this debate is again misleading. The words abolish, in contrast to that of safe, infers that the proposition wishes to inflict harm. The opposite, however, is true. We wish to make people safe by upholding the values of liberty. By encouraging and nurturing open dialogue, we protect our citizens by creating unity and tolerance through shared experience rather than alienation and insecurity through a safe space. With regard to the right to offend, we in the proposition believe that these issues are of morals and of the conscience, issues that only a free-thinking individual can find his own truth in, and these are not to be asserted by another as to what is universally good or true. By implementing safe spaces, we move towards a culture that promotes outrage above free speech, and in doing so we deny platforms to speak in order to not cause offence. We elevate the idea that victimhood trumps freedom, and to believe this you deserve neither. If we go down the road of offence taking having more weight than the right to speak, we enter an ever narrowing pool of acceptable lexical and ideological discussion. Please.
Freedom of speech, while it is a right, it does not automatically equal freedom from consequences. And you've been saying about the fact that people have the right, that we want to help the vulnerable. If freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences and safe spaces are helping vulnerable people, why would you try to abolish them?
Could you maybe give me that?
You seem to have two conflicting ideas in your speech, in that you want to protect freedom of speech while also recognising that vulnerable people should be helped. How do you think that abolishing safe spaces for people will protect both of these things?
Well, basically, the fundamentals of free speech, the reason that they people strode towards them is because laws were being implemented against it. The idea of being able to express yourself has always made people safe in society, and it's why we are arguably among one of the safest points in history because of that. And so, as much as I accept your point, as a whole, we need freedom of expression to serve everyone. The people in opposition seem happy to sign off their civil liberties to an equity council who will decide upon what is permissible and what is not, what is outrageous and what is not, what is free thought and what is intentional offence. To this point I add, who prioritises what is offensive and what is not? How do we decide the person in which we will hand over this control? Censorship of speech is the tyranny of everything. The dictionary definition being the suppression or prohibition of any literature, movie or ideas. The opposition cannot now deny that this is a policy in which they seem keen to implement, that being one of censorship. The safe space, an example, at Ivy League, Brown University in Rhode Island, banned a debate over two leading feminists discussing the controversial issues over sexual assault figures on the college campuses. Here was a real chance for women to be informed of the possible dangers and for men to possibly be exonerated from wrongdoing had the figures been shown to have been falsely manipulated. Instead it was cancelled, giving no individual the chance to tackle, discuss or learn from these real key issues affecting our society today. Now I understand that this is the US. They tend to be a bit quicker to the boil than their Irish and Anglo-Saxon counterparts. However, I also saw videos where students were burning lecturers' books because of their public stance against safe spaces, a crime which rings long in the memory for those who have studied their history and wish not to repeat it. The opposition will speak of how we need to build these individuals up for their future lives. I say beware of the individuals that you are creating. For our citizens, it is a birthright for them to have an education unhindered by interference, free to think and acquire knowledge as they so wish. Liberty, as strong as it is only as robust as the people who wish to uphold it. The vacuum of liberty being tyranny from which any and all horrors may emerge. Dare I mention the trembles we have felt from across the Atlantic. Our universities may be should be a limitless place of rigorous intellectual and ideological discussion. I have dealt with cognitive dissonance one too many times, and I look forward to changing my mind again. For this means that I have been exposed to a contrary opinion and that free speech is alive and well. As free-thinking people, we should prioritise freedom of expression above all else. We should tip the balance from authoritarianism as far as possible towards liberty at all times, and this motion seeks to do so. Free speech and the right to be able to conceive and express our ideas is a right that was fought for in courage and in blood. Those far-sighted individuals, the levellers, the suffragettes, the pacifists of the 60s, and dare I include our own civil rights movement decades ago, they knew that the road to liberty and freedom was through the uncompromised freedom of expression and the unhindered access to knowledge and ideas. There is a definitive choice here. Either our universities are about the pursuit of knowledge or whether they are about the pursuit of happiness. Whether they are about intellectual progression or emotional stability. Ideas don't hurt people, people hurt people. And this distinction is why the pillar of free speech is considered the most important thing in any liberal society. and why we who reap its benefits every Thursday evening must defend it so passionately. I will conclude with the words of the human rights lawyer and now representative in the House of Lords, Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, when she said, "These rights were not made to keep us comfortable, they were made to keep us free." Thank you.
And with that, we welcome the first speaker to the opposition to give their response, Mr. Kieran Campbell.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and other members of the House. I am here tonight to talk to you all about why you should oppose this motion. Now, the underlying question of this debate tonight is about two different conceptions of freedom. The proposition believes in negative freedom, which means freedom from interference with your actions, freedom to know anything and do anything you want to do, no matter what those actions are or if they are going to hurt someone. The opposition believe in positive freedom, which is freedom to live your life without harm, without discrimination, and without hate. Colin, you're a bit mistaken about this culture of censorship which you accuse us of. You do not have to use a safe space if you do not need it. You can stay out there in the real world and use your freedom of speech all you like. But everyone should have the choice, the option to use safe spaces. Abolishing safe spaces removes that option and makes life much more difficult for the people safe spaces are intended for, the people who need them. So who are safe spaces intended for? Essentially, they are for minorities who need to be protected. The next opposition speaker is going to talk more about that, but what I'm going to talk about is mental illness and what happens to mentally ill people when you abolish safe spaces. One of the arguments used by people who are against safe spaces is that trigger warnings are ridiculous and that real life does not have trigger warnings. You're right, it doesn't, which is why life is very difficult. So what is being triggered? Despite the misuse of the word by the right wing as a meme, trigger is a clinical term. The original meaning of it was encountering experiences that cause someone to recall a previous traumatic memory, aka a trauma trigger. Now, what happens after that, is that a mentally ill person faces a decrease in their mental health because of that, and an increase in their symptoms. Direct harm to another person, when they could have avoided that harm if a trigger warning had been present. They would have had the choice, whether or not to use that information. Now, the argument against that is that it is coddling, that letting people not have to come into contact with traumatic memories isn't how the real world works, and that they should just get over it. Disregarding the facts that mental illness just does not work that way, recovery is a very hard process. Getting triggered, at the wrong point in your life, when you just aren't strong enough, can set a mentally ill person back years. So you have to weigh up what is more important: someone's freedom to talk about whatever they want, whenever they want, or a mentally ill person's recovery. And because it happens, I have to mention it. Getting triggered can cause people to attempt suicide. And if they succeed, Colin, it isn't about what kind of individual is made by censorship, it's about whether they survive at all. Your words can have serious consequences. There is a debate about whether or not avoidance of traumatic memories can help or hinder recovery. But you know what? I will leave that to the professionals.
More information.
No, but how are people who don't know much about mental illness to know not how to trigger someone? That is where safe spaces and trigger warnings come in. Maybe it does look a bit ridiculous from the outside, but that's another thing we have to talk about, weighing up privacy versus freedom. You should not have to know the secrets of someone else's history to be able to treat them with respect when they ask you to not talk about a specific subject in front of them. People should be able to keep their reasoning private when they ask you to censor yourself in a safe space. And Colin, I noticed you were saying about there would be a council who would say that you can't say this, you can't say that. But every trauma is individual and is up to an individual person. Perhaps a debate society is the wrong place to say this, but not everything has to be a debate or an argument. Sometimes it is just a request. You do not know what has happened to other people and why they act the way they do. None of us can know that about each other. All we can do is treat each other with respect. As I said, yes, actually.
So, thank you for having the respect to take the point. And the point is that you've already said that we don't know everything about everyone.
Yeah.
We don't know their mental conditions, we don't know what phobias affect them, we don't know what may trigger them. But the problem is that by forcing them into these safe spaces, you force them to identify these things up front, which might make them even more uncomfortable. Also, even if they choose not to identify those things, then you cannot identify if they're able to go into the safe space, and that leaves them vulnerable as well. So everything that you've suggested doesn't solve any of the harms that you've also suggested.
That's the thing, it's up to the individual whether they want a safe space or not. Maybe safe spaces won't help their recovery. It is up to an individual, and everyone should have that choice. But as I said at the start, all we can do is treat each other with respect. But as I said, the opposition believe not in freedom from interference, but freedom to. Freedom to live a peaceful life, freedom to have the choices to deal with your recovery however you want, freedom to recover, freedom to achieve your potential. And sometimes that means that the freedom of other people have to be limited, because there are people out there who all they want to do is harm other people. The opposition believe in protecting minorities from harm and giving them the opportunity to go out into the world and feel safe. That is why we need safe spaces, so that mentally ill people can go out into the real world and feel safe. So the mentally ill people can live a full life. Sometimes the only safe space in the world is your bed. That's certainly how I felt this morning. But when we help each other, when we treat each other with respect, and when we establish spaces to feel safe, that is how we live life to the fullest. So please oppose this motion. Thank you.
Continuing the case of the proposition, this is the governor. What side this is?
Right. I'm actually going to start this off with somebody else's words. By limiting or denying freedom of speech and expression, we take away a lot of potential. We build a world around negatives. You can't say, think, or do this and that. Personally, it's my belief that universities, especially, should be the vanguards of societal progress, encouraging strength, resilience, and most of all, reality. As Kira very nicely reaffirmed, safe spaces are not reality. Safe spaces imply easy, and life nor uni is easy, nor is it, or should it be, designed to be so. I don't think many people in here would be the people they are today, have their lives being handed to them very, very nicely on a silver plate, and everything was just perfect. You are shaped by your struggles and by the things in your life that cause you to push further. For the record, I do not condone disrespect in any sort of way. I do not condone discrimination or being a downright ass. But no one has the right not to be offended. Firstly, I would like to address the fact that safe spaces are incredibly arbitrary and undefined. So, where do they stop and who stops them?
No point.
No, thank you. What safe spaces do is tell us that it's okay to impede upon this freedom in the name of protection and sheltering those who feel marginalised. And while this seems extremely innocent, it tends actually not to be. Put extremely simply, and agree or disagree, what a safe space essentially tells you is, and its notion is, you can freely express yourself everywhere except in Clement's coffee shop because there's someone there that you might offend. And that's just not okay. It isn't innocent because it isn't clearly enough defined so that the parameters can be set to prevent an expansion which will negatively impact upon both freedom of expression and personal development. Not least of all, societal development. Since when was it okay to be so arbitrary on something so important? Who sets the limits? Where are the boundaries? And who gets to define it?
On that point.
Well, thank you. Is it an oligarchy? Is it a tyrant? Which might say Osh has went way far. You just want to say I'm going to have an attorney here and live another Stalin. It's not inconceivable.
On that point,
Yeah.
what is a safe space?
What is a safe
It hasn't
space?
been addressed so far.
A safe space, to me, is all the kind of definitions that come out. So a safe space can be, I'm actually going to address this, but it can be, a physical room. It can be a policy. A safe space can be a place in your mind where you feel like someone can't. So a safe space can be if you walk in here and you are a victim of sexual assault, and people in here can't say it. Or it can be a policy that a university can implement, that a workplace can implement. I don't think it is the one thing, which is what is dangerous about it. Given that they're not similarly defined, in many ways a safe space can be whatever a person who would rather not be insulted wishes it to be. So A might want a room the issue, B might want it implemented by the HR sectors in the workplace, and C might want all people within a mind radius not to be able to say politics. Any rational mind, thinking rationally, understands that reformers just are a bit ridiculous. This all started as an LGBT group thing, where they only wanted members of the LGBT society to be involved. And now look, some university events have policies in place where no white men can enter, and that in itself shows where the expansion can go. Where they could go, yeah.
Does the fact that it can be taken to a ridiculous extreme mean that it's irrelevant in every case?
No, definitely not. But the fact that it can be taken to a ridiculous extreme, and the fact that you can acknowledge that, sort of shows that it in itself, anything that can become ridiculous is ridiculous. Or if it has that sort of, that was actually very, very wrongly said. If it has that sort of potential, then you should not avoid it. You should avoid it. So where they could go may seem difficult to be nice for some, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and things become ridiculous and just happen overnight. They can't expand. Secondly, I'd like to discuss what they do to progress and development, and how they kind of incite a mentality of comfort zones. Safe spaces do not positively affect progress and development wholly on a societal and a personal level. I don't know about everyone else, but just thinking as a woman, as a mother, whenever I have kids, or if I have kids, I do intend to shelter them and protect them to the extent where they feel loved and supported and that they feel dignified. However, I do not intend to coddle them whereby they become too sensitive and are ultimately vulnerable. Our universities and workplaces and public bodies should strive for that balance too. If we don't avoid coddling, we end up giving way to this sort of comfort zone mentality. And safe spaces, yes, provide a sense of security. I refuse to deny that. No, thank you. They do provide a sense of security for many, or some, but it's a false sense of security. Who protects you when you're out in the street? I'm not sure many people here are proponents of any sort of a false sense of security. Back to comfort zones. If we institute comfort zones, again, psychologically, not physically making people uncomfortable and forbidding people from organising things, whether they want to support each other, if you want to go to an AA meeting, no thank you. You want to go to an AA meeting, or if you would like to go to a victim of rape meeting, that's such as your problem, and you should be allowed to do that. But if we institute this sort of let's go to a comfort zone. No, thank you. Then we institute progress halting ideal within our streets and young people. Martin Luther King and the suffragettes, and all these people who have brought about revolutionary change in our society didn't do so by saying, let's get a group of black people together and go to a room and sit there with them and let's be safe. They didn't. They said, let's go out and meet the white people, let's go out and meet our challenges. These people were beat and killed and persecuted and everything. And for us to stand here and strive to freely debate, which I'm going to assume we all agree with because we're all here listening to us debate this evening. If you want to debate freely, well then you should not be a proponent of safe spaces. The opposition are here to debate, and I'm going to assume they would like to do so freely. Therefore, why would you be a proponent of something that can give way to you having to censor what you want to say to a certain extent? I believe the alternative we have a Equality Commission, we have the European Human Rights Convention, and all these things for people to seek justice against discrimination, and so they should do so. I won't let down the women who fought for my right to stand here and debate free by accepting the notion that undermines their way and their principles. Revolution rights activists who made a difference did not do so that we could backtrack and ask for shelter where they would have faced the danger zones and pressed forward. Thank you.
And following on that, I welcome the floor for the opposition, Ms. Sherwood.
Good evening, chairs and members of the House. In beginning my speech, I will first define safe spaces as pointed out by, I don't know your English. I rightly pointed out that nobody has attempted to define it yet, although Lauren did provide some clarity. My definition, or at least the opposition's definition of a safe space, is a place or an environment in which a person or a category of people can feel confident that they will not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any other emotional or physical harm. This is an area with defined and appropriate conduct as opposed to an area of censorship of speech. The proposition's argument has seemed to be centered on the belief that safe spaces will encompass, like, for example, the entire campus and take away everybody's right to freedom of speech. No, thank you. I'm here to argue that, on the contrary, safe spaces in fact protects freedom of speech of minority and marginalized groups as opposed to taking them away from everybody. Because the safe space that we are advocating for is not, for example, an entire campus, but rather 1 or 2 rooms, for example, in the students' union, in which this group can go to should they feel the need to have such a space for them.
On that point?
No, thank you. On this regard, freedom of speech can exist within the safe spaces because safe spaces is not about censorship. Safe spaces exist on the idea that everybody who enters this safe space agrees on a certain set of ideas that are not up for debate. Because in the public sphere, everything else is up for debate. So for example, if you had a safe space for rape victims, no, thank you. If you had a safe space for rape victims, for example, in this space, victim blaming is not going to be up for debate. Rape victims are going to be able to share their experiences without someone from society standing up and asking them what they were wearing or whether they were asking for it. That's what a safe space is. No, thank you. In defining marginalized and minority groups, I'm talking about anybody who may feel like they don't belong in society, or even members of the society who have who had like some terrible experience in which they don't feel like, in which they could be subjected to discrimination, harassment, or any sort of criticism. This can be rape victims, it can be the LGBTQ+ community, it can be victims with mental health issues, it can be victims of post-traumatic stress disorders who've gone through like terrible accidents. It could be marginalized race groups, even disabled people.
On that point?
No, thank you.
No,
Safe spaces protects the freedom of speech, not only of people, not only of the majority, but also of these minority groups, because these people are able to express themselves within safe spaces. They may not express themselves in public for fear of ridicule, being belittled, or even dehumanized by society in general. And therefore, making a safe space for such oppressed groups means that they are more likely to feel comfortable enough to contribute to discussion that concerns them directly.
On that point?
In unsafe spaces, no thank you. In unsafe spaces, well, I should be careful because I'm not saying that by having a couple of rooms in the SU being a safe space that the rest of campus is unsafe, but rather the fact that outside of the safe space, they may not be comfortable sharing their opinions because of fear of hostility or being subjected to bigotry by a more privileged class of people.
On that point.
No, thank you. So on that regard, safe space would encourage more perspectives and more opinion and even more freedom of speech because it protects the speech of these groups, of marginalized groups as well. Next, there's been a lot of criticism about the current generation being this generation of snowflakes because of what, like for example, the proposition has pointed out about no one doesn't have the right to be offended and stuff. However, it's not to say that we are an increasingly sensitive generation because calling us a generation that can't take offense or criticism simply fails to acknowledge the fact that we are a generation of inclusivity that has encouraged more debate about, for example, LGBTQ plus issues, about not victim blaming in terms of rape issues compared to previous generations. No, thank you. The reason that we're seemingly more sensitive or seemingly more offended in society is because these groups are finally having a voice. These groups are more comfortable in speaking out because we are a generation that's more accepting. We are a generation that wants to include, no thank you. We are a generation that wants to include these people. And it is very unfair to say that we are more easily offended because these people have never had a right before. Now, what happens when we don't have a safe space? These people may not feel comfortable about speaking about issues that concern them, and this leads to a very dangerous precedent in the sense that you have a less diversity of perspectives, and the danger that the people which these issues most concern are the people who will not have a voice in these issues. For example, if you had a safe space for people who've been through abortion, and you're going to be discussing how to regulate abortion laws and stuff, in general society, these people are going to be belittled and dehumanized for their choice to undergo abortion. But in a safe space, they are able to talk about it. They are able to provide a perspective on an issue that most of us would never have gone through and never have known what it felt like. And so the most important voices will be sidelined without safe spaces. And on Lauren's point about a false sense of security, these people are aware that the world is evil. You know, they are not going about thinking the world's got to be safe for me and things like that. It is because that these people are subject to hate on the streets that they need these safe spaces to go to. On my last point, respecting one space in an entire campus, a space that you are not forced to enter, is not going to result in your freedom of expression. And there is no reason for us to be afraid that our rights will be taken away, because we should have freedom of speech for all and not just for privileged society. Thank you.
I should also just say that in the midst of that, my fellow council members were berating me for overlooking the fact that we have a maiden speaker here this evening, Miss Lauren O'Neill. So I'm going to embarrass her and ask that you all give her a round of applause. And that I welcome to the floor the third speaker for the proposition this evening, Mr. Comerell.
Right, Mr. Chairman, members of the House, there are three things that I want to talk about tonight. Most of them have already been talked about already by my esteemed colleagues, and I wish to just expand on them. But hopefully I will bring a little bit of a new perspective to the debate as well. So the three things that I do want to talk about is who gets a safe space, how do we police a safe space, and finally the community versus the individual right. Before I start though, I'd like to engage just a little bit of rebuttal. What the opposition have come up with tonight, I can accept the definition that the previous speaker has just given. I have no problems with that. However, we have some contention about where is the safe space, where does it go, how far does it extend. And this is the problem. We get from the last speaker that it should just be a room. that it's a room on campus that people can go to. The problem is that it can't just be a room. It can never just be a room. You see across campuses in the United States and also in the United Kingdom now as well, increasingly as visiting speakers are brought along to debate, that it extends beyond campus rooms in the SU and goes out onto the streets. It goes across campus. These things expand, and thank you. These things expand and they continue to expand. It can't just be that you've isolated one room to give it rules and that's where it stops. The second thing as well is that the last speaker talks about in these rooms they have the safety to speak up when they may not feel comfortable speaking up in the rest of the world in the unsafe space. But the problem is that it's the unsafe space that needs to be challenged. It's that unsafe space where their voices are needed most. In those safe spaces, when everyone else agrees with them and conforms to the same sort of ideals that they do, there is no debate, there is no argument. They are already convinced. But that doesn't create safety for them in the outside world. If they're already marginalised in that unsafe space, they don't become safer in the outside world. No, thank you. So moving on, who gets that space? This has already been discussed before. The concept of the safe space is somewhat arbitrary. What we've heard tonight from the opposition so far is that it can be anything from an ethnic nationalist group to having a condition and experience. And so I decided to test this logic a little bit and think, well, who do we give safe spaces to? And the sort of answers that you can get out of this, they sort of are very controversial. So we talk about historically marginalised groups, but over time, who becomes marginalised in society changes. So for example, in this university, do we create a safe space for poor Protestant boys? Now considering that only 19.7% of Protestant boys on free school meals leave school with 5 GCSEs of A star to C, compared with 32.2% of people from Catholic backgrounds, there's massive underrepresentation of that community in higher education. For example, Queen's University, 41% of people are from a Catholic background, while only 27% are from a Protestant background. Now that doesn't seem a major problem considering historical trends. However, but if you think about your campus as a whole, there is a severe underrepresentation of that community's feeling. Thank you. And that often means that that community's representations, their ideals, are written off. That what they consider to be fundamental to their identity is often described as a dinosaur mentality. And that's dangerous as well. But we come then to the policing of the safe space. There's obscure language used that I don't like the term political correctness. It's like there's all sorts of connotations there. But what you do find is that there has been reclamation of words. Now there are very fundamental and correct reasons for the reclamation of words, and that's fine. But what it has resulted in is obscure and technical language that not everybody understands. And the problem is then that people come in to spaces like universities and they do not want to offend people and they trip up on their own words because they do not know how to address people properly. And that's a problem. One, because we repress our thoughts. We end up in this sort of Orwellian situation where we think we might be committing thought crime, that we feel the need not to express ourselves, to talk, to share ideas. And that's dangerous. That is especially dangerous in an academic environment such as university. Now, speaking from experience, I do a terrorism course. Now, that is an incredibly challenging environment to be in, because you're coming from a place where nearly every family in Northern Ireland has had some experience of a loss of life in the Troubles. Now, when you're discussing groups like the IRA, when you're discussing groups like ISIS, you have to delve into their ideology, their mentality, what makes them tick. And you also have to look at the events of what they did and how they carried those events out in a very clinical way. And that can be incredibly difficult to do if you are a survivor of that, or if you have experience of a family member having gone through that. That can be incredibly traumatic. But yet we have to do it because that's how we understand the issues that are presented to us in our past. That's how we understand and move forward. No, thank you. But moving on, who judges as well, right? Is it RSU? Look at them. They're all white, right? So if you consider that these are for ethno-national groups, then thank you. If you consider that these are all for ethno-national groups that feel like they've been misrepresented by society, right? Then RSU is not the board that should be the ultimate arbiter in that decision. Should it be the university board? They're all male, right? Again, they are not represented, they do not understand the issue. But this gets to a fundamental point. Even if we could diversify these boards so that they were perfectly representative of every single group at the university, there are still power relations within every group. We can think about feminism, which has been from the start controlled by white middle-class women. We can think of the LGBT community that is dominated by gay men, which has led to transphobia and bi-erasure. Within every single group, there is power politics. And that means that even if you can diversify representation, that still means that some people are left marginalised at the expense of others. So finally, I'm going to get now very quickly to the community versus the individual. So safe spaces are about protecting groups. It assures everyone that it just implicitly assumes that everyone in those groups has the same experience. Yet we know that's fundamentally untrue. If we consider that safe spaces are also supposed to be anti-sexist, and that's fine, right? I don't want the society we live in to be patriarchal or sexist either. I don't. However, it implicitly assumes in a safe space that every single woman in that room has had the same experience throughout her lifetime. And we know that that is not true. We know that different women experience different types of sexism, and they consider sexism to be different things. Only 23% of women in America consider themselves to be feminist, and 53% of white women voted for Trump. So when you consider that he is the most misogynistic candidate that has ever come along, right? If they don't think that that will bar him from office, you have to consider what the different people.
Point of information.
Different people have different conceptions of what sexism is, and there is a problem, and that's what it comes down to. Different people have different experiences, and that's impossible to police. So I beg you to oppose or to pop this motion. Thank you very much.
Onwards to the case for the opposition, Mr. Kieran Gallagher.
Evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be back. How are you all? Right. So, from what I've heard, the proposition aren't actually opposing the abolition of safe spaces, but rather the phenomenon of particularly overindulgent or even extreme culture of escapism from reality, triggered by what we've all seen in the news, these ridiculous circus shows and demonstrations of what I actually struggle to call a safe space. So I would like to do something I'm not sure anyone has quite managed as yet, and do the definition job here. Yes, I would largely agree. Actually, no, but before I do go on, actually, there is one thing I want to say. It has come up about mental health. I am not qualified enough to comment on mental health, no more than the proposition are, and certainly I would suspect any more than people in this room. So I do suspect in certain cases that there may be more harm being done than good, but that is not for us to discuss. I would suspect that is for people who are qualified and know what they're talking about. So I'm going to stay clear of that. But so far, a lot of what you've heard is nothing about safe spaces. Why not go on?
Surely it's for people that have experienced mental health that have an opinion on how they should be treated and how that should be dealt with, as well as.
Yes, but that's a conversation for them to have with that. Also, it depends on what you call mental health, of course. But anyway, a lot of this has nothing to do with safe spaces, in fact, from what I've heard. As I just said, it's not the phenomenon that's half a decade old. Safe spaces have existed for a very long time and in a great variety of forms. So whether you're a privileged white, straight cisgender male like me or any other less privileged person, we can all find that life offers us very hard challenges which we wisely or otherwise need to deal with or discuss in private with people we do select because we trust them or because we place confidence in them one way or another. What, for example, would you call a session with a psychiatrist if not a safe space? What is an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting if not a safe space? Go on.
I feel this is sort of squirreling the motion, right? But like what we are talking about is public safe spaces, not private sessions with psychologists. We're talking about spaces on campus that are stopping free speech from happening.
That's not what it says in the motion, so I'm going to drive ahead. Actually, no, in all seriousness, I disagree. So, who would have court? And these are things which have mutual suspect. Actually, I did already say I don't think some of the campus-wide safe spaces where they're. Yes, just because it's you.
An appointment with a psychiatrist or a psychologist
Yeah.
is bounded by confidentiality
Yeah.
and therefore completely exempt from safe spaces. That's one set of laws and ethics. Safe spaces is something completely different.
No, I disagree. For example, what would you also call a Catholic confessional box? What would you call an orange hall, for goodness sake? What would you call toilets, nursery schools? And these are spaces, and I'm going to prove this, these are spaces with tangible boundaries recognised universally in our society, and there are countless other self-help groups that are also qualified. So these are spaces. And as we've already agreed, they are, for the most part, private and are for the mutual support, not the condemnation. So they are safe. So we've established they are safe spaces. Now, the other thing, unfortunately, as much as a nuisance as some of the safe spaces that we're tempted to talk about tonight are, how are you going to get around the obstruction of one of the greatest Western society rights that we hold dear, the right to an assembly? How are you going to get around that trap? No. What was that?
On that point.
No, do you know what? I've given away enough. Free speech is... yes, actually, here's another thing. The free speech thing that came up. If I thought this was about free speech versus censorship, I would absolutely be on this side of the room, but it's not. That is swirling the motion. Free speech is about what is permitted to be expressed in society. It does not entitle you to say anything that comes to your mind in any given circumstance or platform. We all know that to be true, one way or another. There are certain things I could not get away with saying, and I'll prove it. Fuck. What? Did you guys lift that rope?
No, I don't.
Point proved.
One more point.
But yes. I've lost my space now. Anyway, yes. What else did I want to talk about?
Would you take a point?
Huh?
Would you take a point?
Yes, go ahead. Here we go.
Just have them out, you know. Again, I was going to ask the first and second speaker. This is censorship. We believe that it's a right to assembly. Go to a college campus in America and go in and talk about abortion in a safe space. You can literally get suspended. Lecturers are losing their jobs because of this. That is censorship. Done.
Yeah. I agree with that, but that's a consequence of safe spaces rather than what takes place in the safe spaces. I could communicate that better, but I think I'm closing on my time. So, do you know what? I will actually, because most of the other things that have been said, or could have been said, have already been said, so I'm not going to divulge much further. I will simply say, I hope after I haven't seen a lot of you in a long time that you will join me in the pub, which is halfway spot to my own personal safe space, namely my house. And I'm sorry, but none of you are. Very good.
That's for the proposition this evening, Mr. Nathan.
People in the gallery, I want to totally agree with what he said. This is a consequence. This is a consequence of safe spaces. That is what we're leading to. Now, I want to say, I am not an expert in mental health, but I have had some experience myself. I had 5 years of depression, and yes, you know what, there were times people said things to me during that actually nearly did tip me over the edge. So I totally understand. But you know, what was very helpful in that time was when other people used the social consequences and challenged those people, rather than having safe spaces. I personally don't think that the previous speaker has gotten all the correct definition. And this is a debate about definitions of what safe spaces are. An orange hall, or a Catholic church, or wherever we are, local clubs, they're not safe spaces because
the definition that was given by the second speaker is a definition of safe space that cannot exist. Because there is no safe space. There is no place where in your mind where you cannot be challenged. Even in your mind, you can be challenged. It just doesn't exist. So the whole notion of a safe space is actually pointless. Alright.
On that point, sir?
Yes, go for it.
So you don't want to abolish them because they don't exist, can we all go home now?
What is called a safe space? They call that a safe space, but it's not a safe space. That's the point. You see, the issue is actually, and this is where we are coming to, and I think actually you can sort of see where the proposition has actually been arguing. It is public space. We have no issue. I have no issue with therapy rooms. You know, I have no problem with clubs. The issue is when public space becomes designated as a safe space and where you cannot speak what is necessary at times to speak, which is doing what we are doing right now and engaging in severe discussion. You see, some safe spaces, you know, I read this in the news, a room covered in pink pillows and kittens with plates on them. Safe space, no, that's actually Professor Umbridge's office. You see, like the description of Umbridge's office, it is something that looks on the outside as something welcoming. But actually, when you go in to the office, you find it's actually become something quite totalitarian. To declare public space as safe and designated for the expression of only certain groups, views or ideas or identities excludes, it limits, and it declares the rest of the world unsafe. We live in a society that tells us the world is a dangerous place, and we must be protected from dangers that surround us. It started well enough, and you know it's important to protect people in work and at leisure. Yet this has evolved into a situation where people are so thin-skinned that they will take a lawsuit because somebody has said something that they disagree with. You know, this moves me to my next point. The wider philosophy behind safe spaces alleges that respect is not just common courtesy, but a directly enforceable rule. This is more like an absolute monarchy than a liberal democracy. Of course we should be respectful, but when respect means not stating the truth or stating obvious flaws and stating what needs to be said or standing for justice, it is cowardice, my friends. It's cowardice. We must have truth over respect. A disrespectful Gandhi will always be preferable to a person who turns a blind eye to injustice. Sometimes what culture defines as respect, we must challenge. We must forgo for the sake of greater prize a free society. And we come back to John Stuart Mill himself when he said that harm ought to be enforced, but offence must never be enforced. As that is the death of freedom by 1,000 qualifications, and it's something therefore can be enforced socially, but not legally. The notion of safe spaces confuses harm and makes the illogical step to equivocating that with offence. Harm must be prevented, offence cannot, nor ever should be enforced.
On that point.
One second. One of the unintentional consequences of safe spaces is that it makes the dangerous step of turning what is a beautiful shield into a double-edged sword, which can be used against the very minorities it seeks to protect. Yes.
You say, you say, you know, we've got to prevent harm, and you know we shouldn't really bother preventing offence. But there are cases where safe space exists to prevent actual harm. Like someone who has PTSD, and if they hear something, I don't know, they hear something horrible, and they have a flashback, and they consider killing themselves. That is direct harm. That's not just offence. That's what safe spaces exist to prevent.
Absolutely, and what we're talking about is public space. We're talking about whenever public space is being made into a place where we cannot challenge ideas. And you know what? Whenever I had an experience like that, I would honestly say that the consequences of people saying you cannot say certain things is much greater than the harm even to yourself as an individual. You know, safe spaces try to protect students from what is seemingly a dangerous world. This seemingly noble parental attitude, when applied to a 5-year-old, may have some merit. However, when applied to an 18-year-old student, it has a negative consequence. The ambition of the academy is to shock you. The desire of the university is to disturb you. The enterprise intellectual quest is to actually challenge you. This is something that we actually miss out when it comes to our severe. We don't want to be locked into our own echo chamber of cotton wool. Let's actually put on armour and train people to be robust. Train them at the community to challenge false beliefs, challenge deeply cherished ideas, and let us say with Plato, allow the evidence, and let us follow and allow us to follow the evidence where it leads. Had we not this situation in the academy, had we not this situation in politics, had we not this situation in the economy, the Galileos, the Platos, the Pauls, the Wilberforces, they would not have challenged what is fundamentally wrong in our society. And for that, I submit that to you. Thank you very much.
The opposition and therefore this evening, Mr. Matthew Brother.
Good evening. At the end of Mr. Gallagher's speech, he says that everything that has been said or could have been said has essentially been said. So I'm going to try and say some more. Just make of that what you will. Now, I think there are a couple of issues that I've found with the proposition's argument with regards to the idea of freedom of speech and also the idea of a safe space. They've sort of alluded to this idea that a safe space will inconvenience their freedom of speech, the idea that they can't say what they want. But my point is this: it's within that space. You can go out of that space and say what you want. This is a space where people can be free from that debate. What if you do not want to talk about that issue? What if it's an issue you don't want brought up because you've simply had enough?
Point of information, you're not in touch.
Some spaces are not appropriate to be safe spaces. As I alluded to, there are some university courses that offer really challenging subject matter. We took best in terrorism course, English, first year. It's a legitimate subject. First year course brings up some books that raise very challenging points. My point is this: if you know that you're going to be challenged somewhere, don't do that course. That's the point I'm trying to bring forward to you. If you know that that's going to offend you, just don't go there. And we want to move towards a world of unity and tolerance. I'm not going to dispute that at all. But we're not there at the moment, as we saw in America. I accept.
So what you just said, that we're moving towards tolerance, we have literally seen that people are... You say that the safe space is just within a room or a place or an area. It has morphed into something more. These lobbies they're lobbying deans of universities to stop the likes of Nick Griffith coming to speak, to stop pro-Israeli lawyers and stuff coming to speak at Harvard. They're actually morphing and banning people from speaking. And so it's more than this wee safe space that we like to make out. This is something that's it's malicious and malignant, and we need to address that.
Ideally, they should not be malicious or malignant. Yes, you could take anything. I think it was the second speaker of the proposition who made this brilliant point that if something can be made ridiculous, it will be. And I think that we need to control safe spaces to make sure that they are safe and not promoting hate in themselves.
More information.
Accept.
Surely the inability for you to control safe spaces so far across UK and US campuses suggests that these things can be controlled, and that once you've started dedicating a room, that they do start to evolve over the campuses, and that the students do start lobbying deans to ban speakers. So you can't control safe spaces, and that's the fundamental point this side of the House is arguing.
Yes. Pretty much, yeah. They're difficult to control, but that doesn't mean they should be completely abolished. Imperfection does not mean you should get rid of that idea. It's a good idea in theory. If you think about it, you know, safe space, if someone, say we've brought up the idea of PTSD before, and I'm going to bring something incredibly controversial into the house, and I'm going to have to be incredibly careful about how I word. You know what? You know, right. Triggering is not offence. There has been a bit of a sort of idea of this. It is a clinical thing that does happen to people. There are flashbacks. Flashbacks are not pleasant. And it, you know, I have completely lost my place, but I will find it in a minute.
Would you like a filler?
Pardon?
Would you like a filler?
No, I did a filler last week and it didn't go down very well. And I've completely lost where I was, so I'm just going to continue. I shall move on to the idea of freedom of speech, which seems to be what most people want to be talking about tonight. Is it really out of the question to have a specific area or areas where certain ideas cannot be discussed? Is it really just going to be a case of people walking through safe spaces or areas and thinking, I have to air my view on this in this particular area? It's not stopping you going to somewhere else and airing that particular view. It's just within that space. And that's an idea I'd like to put forward, that they should be limited. We can't have safe spaces that cover an entire campus. That idea is hyperbolic, and as you said, it does not work. These spaces should be limited to, let's say, the space in the Students' Union. That could be, I know that's used for discussion, it's just being used as an example here, but it would be a good, safe space. It would be a place where people could go and feel that they will not be less so offended, but marginalised or discriminated against. I accept.
I would like to point out that the idea that you're posing this room with it, that we can go and not be prejudiced, the function you're proposing a safe space could perform is the same function that could be performed by a room with a locked door.
I agree. It could be performed by that, but it could be performed this way as well. The fact that it's a public area means it's more poignant. It means that these people can be out in public, not locked away somewhere. It means that they can be themselves wherever, well, in the safe space, obviously, but out in public.
No barricade.
And the idea of, I'm going to keep going with freedom of speech because it seems to be what most people want this debate to be about. But if safe spaces should be abolished for stifling freedom of speech, should we abolish anti-swearing regulations? There are anti-swearing regulations on trains. You can get fined over £400 for swearing on a transport train. Let's think of more areas that I think most people in here would agree are very productive, that completely stifle freedom of speech. Let's think about the silent area in Macleay Library. You cannot speak there. That is the complete antithesis of freedom of speech. Yes, it's completely acceptable. Freedom of speech, I accept. I really want to know what he said now, because a really great leap, because I crossed out most of this because other people said it. Yes, safe spaces may appear to be a tad silly and hyperbolic. Yes, there's the entire internet meme culture of triggered. There are people that will take everything too seriously. We've seen that in every facet of life. What I'm saying is a controlled safe space where people feel accepted, that is policed not in an authoritative way, but where there is an equal understanding, not just towards the people that need the space, where people are respectful of their needs, but also a respect that the people that are in the space may not be fully educated on what that space is for. We cannot look for a utopian safe space that's all sunshine and rainbows, but we can work to make them better, and abolishing them is not a way to do that. If you think the people that need safe spaces are a load of whiners, abolishing them will just make that worse.
Questions from the floor, so if anyone has a question for the proposition I'll raise first, I'll go with Mr. Cargill first.
One example of a safe space which would fall under the definition put forth, and I suppose generally agreed upon by everyone, is LGBT society. This is a space where LGBT people can go without the risk of being physically assaulted or discriminated against in any way. And it's a space where they can go be out of the closet, whereas they may not be out of the closet to their family or their friends. This is by her definition a safe space. What would your argument against such a space existing be?
Mr. Chairman, members of the House. So actually, I would disagree that it does fit the example of a safe space. First of all, nothing on what we've said on this side of the House does limit the right to public assembly. We understand that individuals have the right to form clubs among their interest and discuss things within similar interest groups. None of what we have said disagrees with that. However, I fundamentally disagree that an LGBT plus society is a safe space. First of all, as I've already alluded to in my own speech, power politics does exist within every single group. That includes the LGBT community. And we've seen that there is domination within the LGBT plus community from gay men that leaves lesbian women underrepresented. It forgets that bi people often exist, and it also discriminates against transgender people as well. And that's a problem. So that means that in those sort of societies, there isn't an entirely safe space. Those people are still challenged on their viewpoints. And there may be a similar, people around them, but that doesn't mean that the society is an entirely safe space. And so I would challenge you on that.
The opposition like to respond to that?
It's the idea that I do agree with everything you said about the LGBT plus society. Those things do exist, right? But for example, if it was like, say, a meeting with all these people, with this group involved, for example, they're completely open to controversial views. You know, like safe spaces does not limit contrasting or differing or dissenting opinions. It merely sets out that everybody who comes, for example, into the LGBT plus society, or for example, a meeting that they hold, agrees that you cannot stand up and say, I don't think you should exist, I don't think your humanity is valid. You know, so it's just safe spaces just agrees on a basic set of ideas, but it does not limit dissenting or controversial opinions. It's merely like just certain ideas, such as whether their existence is valid or not, is not up for debate. It's just not every idea within a safe space is up for debate. So.
And just before I say, sorry, Mr. Whitehurst here has a contract with OK magazine, so if you see him snapping photos of you, if you don't approve of him snapping photos of you, please raise your hand and tell him about our office. So we'll get safe space. That said, does anyone have a question for the opposition? Mr. Goblin?
It was, I believe, the third speaker on this side of the House mentioned that it's the radical examples of safe spaces do not represent what they're about as a whole. But we can only look at the UK, the National Union of Students, a legitimate organisation spearheading what safe spaces do, banning Jewish student groups from meeting on a campus-wide basis, I might add, and from inviting speakers. This is A, true censorship, and B, is discrimination on minority groups. What we have is safe spaces, is protecting the groups they think are worth protecting and actively marginalising others. So what can they possibly achieve since we have that kind of system by the legitimate organisations of safe spaces in the UK?
I think you're connecting to something different to what I'm talking about. Speaking of which, by the way, you are all members of NUS. If you have a problem with what they do, I suggest you get in contact with them. Very, very easily done, particularly in Northern Ireland. But going on to your point, I do disagree with a lot of things that NUS do. And I can say that now because I'm not a member of them. But do you know what I find about all the particularly nonsense things like that happen? Is why do people stay quiet about this? What lets this phenomenon that actually, yes, I agree, is malignant and dangerous, as you put it, I believe, what lets it take place, what does give rise to censorship is the fact that people, the rest of society, don't stand up for people who are trying to contribute something decent or something interesting to a conversation. Whether or not it's right is another question, but to go back to that, I think we should just, if we just stood up to this sort of thing, it would die out in a matter of years. It would be as simple as that.
Yes, I want to agree. If we all challenge false beliefs, if we all challenge these things, there is no need for safe spaces. It's pointless. Because the reason we're going to safe spaces and retreating in is because somehow we think that's going to protect us. It won't. It is only when the mass of people come out and challenge false views, Holocaust deniers. And we've got a movie that's just come out about the Holocaust denier, and what happened, it was brought to court, he was beaten into the ground because truth conquered over lies. And when somebody denies your humanity, the way to deal with that is to use truth, and the group to use truth to conquer lies. That is the thing. We need to, instead of retreating into safe spaces, we need to put on the battle and say, put on the armour and say, let's have enough of this. We've had enough of false views. That is the thing. And you're absolutely right as well. I want to agree with the proposition. It is when there's an abuse of freedom. You can destroy freedom as much by abusing it as by taking it away. And I want to say that remember this, when we come to safe spaces, every single dictatorship, every single democracy that turned into dictatorship said it was taking control for the sake of the public good and the elimination of harm. Let's not be deceived here. Get rid of safe spaces.
Questions on the motion, that something that they think both sides have sort of overlooked, or that you'd like to throw both sides on. Why is the proposition asking a question? No. Yourself, sir. If you could just state your name for the record, as well. Tom McGinnis.
I feel the opposition has somewhat coloured debate by only focusing on sympathetic or agreeable forms of safe spaces. Disagreeable, reprehensible examples of safe spaces. Say, for instance, this is a purely hypothetical, a safe space where you're only allowed to say that minorities aren't people. Would you defend the right of that place to exist, or would you, without challenge? Would you say that somewhere where questioning the government is not permitted, would you allow that to go without challenge? For instance, Sean Spicer's press room, for instance, is the example of a reprehensible safe space. We need the ability to challenge these places. Would you say that places that are reprehensible examples of safe spaces are permissible?
Was that
wasn't quite abstaining, but we'll
I'm sure. I would absolutely defend their right to assemble. I would absolutely defend their right to express themselves. But certainly I would challenge them. The two are not mutually exclusive.
Proposition, would you like to respond to that, maybe?
Yeah, well, of course we agree with what you're saying. I have other examples of that. There is a community college in Chicago, in Tennessee, that has a black student-only zone. And that is absolutely atrocious. It's nothing if not a kind of light spin on segregation, if I would go as far as that. And to have this ideological view of what a nice safe space is the wrong way to approach the issue, because what our side is arguing is that we would abolish safe spaces for what they can be, for when they are malignant, for when they are wrong, for when they impede on our development and how we can possibly live our lives as students in university and elsewhere.
Another question for the proposition. All right then.
I've done that many points. For me, the most poignant point was made during the debate was by the second speaker of the opposition, who spoke about how safe spaces can be used for the examples that you gave was rape victims and people who have experienced abortion. And and you raised this as an example of how being in that environment can build people up to, as like a temporary thing, to go into the outside and build up their confidence, to, not debate, but to go into the public realm and talk about their experiences. And for me, the proposition seems to have been a bit coy with the wording of the motion. Like, I think the third speaker proposition maybe said that we were talking about a very specific thing. No, we were talking about the motion is we are abolishing all safe spaces. And the idea that the proposition immediately going to the extreme mentioned these examples of where it can turn into fascism or what have you. But the idea of abolishing these spaces where victims of rape or people who've been through abortion can talk about their experiences to build up their confidence to go outside into what is a very difficult world to be in if you've been through such things. The idea of abolishing those things leaves me a little bit sick to my stomach, and would like to hear the proposition's thoughts on this.
Mr. Chairman, members of the House, in a previous life, I was chair of the Manchester Debating Union. And one of the motions that we tried to have last year was a motion on abortion and a motion on abortion in Northern Ireland. Now, we were not allowed to have that. We were not allowed to have that motion. We were not allowed to invite speakers to that motion, not because of a campaign by a student group, but because of the university. The university came in and they opposed us having that debate because they said they wanted to ensure the safety of their students, because recently an abortion clinic had been across the road from the university, and so they thought that female students from the university might feel affected by it and not want to talk about it. So, you're right, I have sympathy with the sort of spaces that allow survivors of rape and people that have had traumatic experiences, have gone through abortions, all sorts of these experiences, and even ones that are even less traumatic that people need support. That's fine, we understand that, but those are in private environments, and nothing we said tonight limits the right of private assembly for people to set up these societies. What we have talked about tonight is the commandeering of public spaces and turning them into safe spaces, because we don't know where that line is. We don't know where that line goes from saying that this is a room for rape survivors to talk about, to when that goes out to the rest of the campus to say, for the university suddenly becomes concerned about student safety and refuses to have that debate at all, which denies women that have had abortions to talk about their experience in the public realm as well. And that's the problem. It's a difficult line for us to find. It would be an arbitrary line, and we're not sure that a line can be definitively drawn where a safe space can be properly policed, that it doesn't spread out of these rooms and onto other, like, into the public realm. And that's our problem tonight.
I'm not allowed to debate on this ground. But opposition, would you like to respond to that?
I'm very sorry the university didn't allow you to have that debate. I completely disagree with what the university did, because that completely stifles freedom of speech, and that is not what we are about. What the university could have done in that regard, for example, if you wanted to have such a motion, such controversial motions like abortion, was simply to have a trigger warning and, you know, tell the student body that, you know, this debate is going to be about this, and it may contain some elements that may make you uncomfortable, and you don't have to attend it if you think it's going to make you uncomfortable. No one's forced to do so. In the same regard, no one's forced to attend this. No one is forced to enter a safe space and have your freedom of speech completely taken away from you, which also is not the case, but you don't have to go for it if you don't need it. No one forces you to enter the safe space, and I don't see how having, like, we want to draw a line where we have, like, all agreed that a safe space is not an entire campus. There are instances, as brought up by the proposition, even members of the floor, in which safe spaces has extended to the entire campus, like what you said about the NUS. We disagree with those movements. Safe spaces do not have to do that. Safe spaces can be a clubroom in the RSU. I can call for a meeting about the Black Lives Matter movement, for example. And, you know, I'm going to say in this meeting that you can have anything that's up for debate. You can talk about how the movement brings more good or more harm, or like what the movement can do to be better, or what, like, how terrible the movement is at the moment. Whatever. You can have dissenting opinions. What you cannot talk about is whether the movement. What you cannot talk about is whether Black lives should matter. Because I don't want someone in that meeting to stand up and tell me that all lives matter. I'm aware all lives matter. All human beings matter. But in this meeting, if it's for if it's a safe space for members of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's about what the movement can do better. It's about any debate that I want to have, but what's not up for debate. What is being censored is the idea that their lives do not matter. So that's how limited the censorship is, and that is what I think has been failed to acknowledge by the proposition, who seems to think that it's going to morph into the entire campus, because we ourselves disagree with those sort of safe spaces.
And that will take the question from the opposition. Yourself, sir.
We've had, from a couple of different perspectives here, we've talked about safe spaces as you've just described them there, nobody's obliged to go in them. And I've heard the proposition this evening turn around and say, well, those are fine. Private spaces, no problem at all. When you're kept in a private space and it's not intruding on a public area, that's all right. We've also heard from the closing speaker for the opposition that these safe spaces should be lauded when they're in public spaces. That just because you're welcome to have these opinions, you just don't share them in a safe space. How can you reconcile these two conflicting points, where you have safe spaces being great because they're public, and having safe spaces that wouldn't be public because that's wrong, because that's censorship?
Surely you can have both. It's not exactly that it's completely wrong and that they should be shut away, but the fact that these places can exist alongside these, and the fact that we have public ones. I think we live in a world today where we share our opinions all the time. We've got Facebook, Twitter, we've got the internet. We're used to sharing our opinions with as many people as possible. Is it possible in today's world that for once we can just shut up? We can keep our opinions to ourselves, let people get on with their lives, and if we want to share our opinions, share them elsewhere.
Proposition, would you like to respond? Mr. O'Neill?
Thanks. Members of the House, there actually does seem to be a clear schism between the opposition. So first I'd actually like to mention that the only time Snowflake has been mentioned in this debate is actually by the opposition. Secondly, they actually have, as we've seen, they are keen enough to mobilise and prepare to debate on certain matters, but then they also don't want anyone's input on the others. So it's okay that Black Lives can come and debate, but they won't actually invite anyone else to the discussion. I'll let you read into that what you will. And the main point that I'd like to make is that there's this concept that within the safe space, people are going to come and debate things. That's on their terms, whether it be abortion, whether it be rape. The whole point in the safe space is that these things aren't mentioned because they can be triggering. The idea that all these women meet up in a safe space and discuss about sexual assault, that's not allowed to happen, and that's the point. This is the crux of it, that you're not allowed to talk about abortion, you're not allowed to talk about rape, you're not allowed to talk about discrimination, because it could trigger someone. And so this is why we want to do away with it.
So I will take one question and then we'll get a meeting either side. Lucky you, whoever you are. Prefer to take someone who has never spoken before, so yourself, sir, on the end.
I'm Zach. For the opposition, you mentioned that, or you mentioned specifically that the rules are not up for debate when you have a safe space, right? So let's accept that safe spaces are then implemented on universities across campuses in the UK, Ireland, US, wherever. Where, in practice, how does this take place? Are students fined? Are they suspended? Are they brought in front of a jury trial? And then do you think that'll have a chilling effect on free speech or on speech that might be offensive to some individuals of marginalized communities?
I completely take your point. Okay, the thing is that every trauma is individual. You know, it's up to an individual to choose what they want or do not want to listen to. Like, where I would draw the line is like, say you had a safe space, for example, here, if this was a safe space, and if, for example, I was having a meeting on like abortion or rape or Black Lives, if I wanted censorship on speech that is not progressive or constructive to the debate that I'm currently having. What is wrong with that? I mean, what is wrong with barring white men from attending a Black Lives Matter meeting? If I wanted, like, if this meeting, if the meeting concerned only a very specific group of people, and like, I don't mean that in a very racist way. I'm just using it as an example, and I know it's a terrible example. But yeah, it's just the idea that if I was having a meeting for like rape victims and stuff, I'm going to draw the line where you're going to come in and say like she should be blamed, like victim blaming is not up for debate. Everything else is, but this very basic idea of victim blaming is not going to be up for debate. So it's a very basic limit. It's a very fundamental limit on this kind of meetings, and it doesn't have to be like a specific, like you don't have to like have a specific room for each specific issue. You can have one room and you can have specific time for different issues. For example, like if I were to call a meeting here for rape victims and then you would, like an hour later, you were to call a meeting for Black Lives Matter, like, you know, it's up to you where you want to draw, like it's up to you where you want to focus the debate on and what you want to censor. But essentially there would be a very basic idea that is agreed upon by everyone who enters the meeting. For example, in an LGBT plus meeting, what is not up for debate is the fact that they should not exist, or that they are like, you know, not human beings, because they are, you know, and what, you know, you could, yeah, I think I'm repeating myself too much, sorry. And I apologize for that very terrible example. Like, I realize it's a very racist example, but I'm just trying to get my point across, and I'm very nervous.
I don't think anyone's questioning your integrity, and I don't think anyone's questioning the integrity of the opposition. I genuinely believe they believe this is the right thing. Where I think they're wrong is they're naive. And I think they're naive about the consequences of this decision. You know, so we come back to what they're saying. You know, of course, everyone is totally in support whenever it comes to issues like rape and issues which are very important, you know, and abortion. There's no question about that. And the issue there, and we must consider this, is it's about confidentiality. As one of the speakers there, it is covered under a totally different set of ethics. It is not to do with safe spaces. This is confidentiality. And confidentiality means that whenever these situations come up, you can speak quietly and in full confidence with the therapist, not just the therapist, but sometimes your friends. You know, whenever it comes down to the issue of groups, you'll say the LGBT community. That is a club where people come together with shared values and a shared ethos to come and explain shared values and shared experiences. This is not a safe space. And we harken on about the extreme cases. Of course we do. Just as the gun lobby in America harkens on about the anti-gun lobby harkens on about the extreme cases. Because the problem is, with guns, whenever it's taken to the extreme, the amount of harm is severe. I would say it's the same with the safe spaces, because in the good sense, in the limited good that it does, is far outweigh the potential for great harm. We only have to think of the university that our good friend here was on, where they actually censored a debate, a public debate, because they were afraid of trigger warnings. That is where, and that is the reason that we, and I, am commending you to vote for this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And we now turn to votes in the House this evening. Our first vote this evening will be based on prior opinions, so what your opinions were on the motion before you enter the room and heard the arguments this evening. If you're in favour of the motions this evening, before you enter the room, please raise your hands and say aye. Aye.
Aye. Proposition can raise their hand And those against, please raise your hands and say nay.
No.
And if you have no prior opinion on the motion before you enter the room this evening, please raise your hands and say nay.
Nah. Perfectly valid opinion.
Perfectly valid black opinion.
Hey!
Hands up one more time for Madison.
Very high. And now this is the vote on speaker ability, so how it's really do this evening. So if you've got the proposition argued their case effectively, more effectively I should say, please raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And if you've got the opposition argue their case more effectively this evening, if you think that they pick apart motions, I'm telling you that's the right way. Yeah. So if you've got the opposition to put this evening, please raise your hands and say aye, I guess, because you're affirmative. So, yeah. If you thought both sides argued equally well, they both argue their case. I'm just past it. If you thought both sides spoke equally well or equally rubbish, I'll leave you to decide which. Please raise your hand and say woo. Woo. Right, those in favour of the motion, 30. Those against, 5. 16 abstentions. The motion has passed. Both teams this evening on what is, of course, a very difficult motion, a very contentious motion, and I appreciate that you all respected each other. You're all very safe. You all felt very good. Appreciate that. And with that, I'd say thank you. The only other thing to mention is a little more about our annual general meeting that will be held, I repeat, on the Monday, the 3rd of April. A copy of the Constitution will be posted on the letter of form this evening, just to get out to you so that you can check out the rules and what those rules involve. So if anyone's interested in finding out any more about the rules on the council, do please talk to any of us after part of our where we'll be adjourning to this evening. I should say that if you'd like to nominate yourself for a position on council, you need to email me, and you need to have the name of somebody who's willing to second you for that position. They need to be a member of the society. And with that, we'll all adjourn to that part of